Hey there, folks. I'm Mark, in affiliation with Spectrum Pulse, and it's Billboard Breakdown. I don't remember. So, you might all be wondering why this episode is late. Well, for once, it actually has nothing to do with me, as Billboard themselves had to delay their Hot 100 charts for additional auditing and examination of specific channels, which resulted in the charts getting delayed and a very specific fan base melting down. We'll get into why in a little bit, but I will say for an otherwise pretty dry week in between album bombs, it did actually make things kind of interesting and gave me a Tuesday night off for once, which I actually really did appreciate. Anyway, our top 10, and where all the controversy is, Leave the Door Open by Silk Sonic returned to number 1. Now, as I said last week, what would wind up on top was really just a margins game, and that absolutely happened here, as this song's dominant radio, slightly stronger YouTube just edged out the competition, which was Levitating by Dua Lipa featuring DaBaby at number 2. Now, this song was actually projected to go to number 1 based off its sales advantage, strong radio, better streaming, but according to Billboard and some external projections, the edge Dua Lipa lost came in the sales, where it had been rumored there was bulk international buying using US VPNs, as well as bulk buying from other websites. Now, I said this on Twitter, this sort of gamesmanship I usually tend to mock fairly regularly, but for artists whose record deals have incentives often built in for number 1 hits, and labels who want that added run of publicity, to say nothing of the stan bases who wanted Dua Lipa to get her first proper number 1, this was contentious, and I would expect demands for transparency in some of those audit processes or a rules change to be coming down the pipeline for Billboard sooner rather than later. And at number 3, Peaches by Justin Bieber featuring Daniel Caesar and Giveon, which outside of a pretty convincing radio run, it's falling back in and of itself. Now, all this knocked back Save Your Tears by The Weeknd and Ariana Grande off the top to number 4, mostly thanks to sales and streaming falling back and some radio peaking. The top spot, it was clinched there, it was just going to ebb away naturally. Probably it's going to get passed by Kiss Me More by Doja Cat and SZA soon at number 5. Streaming still rock solid, and while radio gains are pretty slow, they are picking up where they need to, which is also unfortunately true for Astronaut in the Ocean by Masked Wolf up to number 6, because the sales and streaming are holding their own, and the radio is moving, albeit slower. Hell, it put it over Rap Star by Polo G at number 7, where streaming is still strong, but the utter lack of sales and radio really being slow to get on board will hold us back from getting any higher. And that takes us to the upcoming story in the next week, debuting at number 8, Interlude by J. Cole. It's pretty much just here on streaming, which will be the story of the album bomb coming next week, and while I'll get into the actual song much later on, I will say it is kind of interesting to see which of J. Cole's tracks actually achieve higher chart penetration, because even if I'm kind of middling on the album, I do think it's got some songs that could see some surprising traction, but it also meant that Without You by Kid Laroi and Miley Cyrus got elbowed back to number 9, as it couldn't quite pick up enough sales and radio in order to close in the margins, and Montero, Call Me By Your Name by Lil Nas X slid down to number 10, because even if the radio seems to be finally getting on board, he's got one hell of a margin to close to get any way higher. Now, given that this is a transitional week, when we go to our losers and our dropouts, there really aren't that many surprises. In the latter category, we saw Somebody Like That by Tennille Arts make a pretty early exit. Again, it was getting rotated out, along with Go Crazy by Chris Brown and Young Thug, which easily clinches its year-end spot. Yay. And our losers are also pretty easy to predict, with album bombs like from DJ Khaled fading off the debut with I Did It with Post Malone, Megan Thee Stallion, Lil Baby, and DaBaby at 88, and Let It Go with Justin Bieber and 21 Savage at 94, and for Moneybagg Yo, Shada's Lala at 72, and Go with Big 30 at 100. Also off the debut, we saw Country Again by Thomas Rhett at 95, and Botella Tras Botella by Jera MX and Christian Nadal continue to slip down to 89. But the surprise for me came with Billie Eilish. Your Power fell pretty hard off the debut to 29, and Therefore I Am took a hit as well at 45. Not really great for momentum, although radio being slow on the former and softening on the latter might be the bigger culprit here. Now, as in the majority of transition weeks, I've got no expectations for any of the gains and returns here, especially in the latter category, with Chasing After You by Ryan Hurd and Maren Morris coming back at 90, and Drunk and I Don't Want to Go Home by Elle King and Miranda Lambert managing to claw its way back at 98. But it's a lot more suspect in our gains here, which I don't really expect to last. AJR pushed Way Less Sad to 85, Hello by Late Pop Smoke and A Boogie with Da Hoodie is at 84, Arcade by Duncan Lawrence is riding off slow radio growth to 78, and Waukesha by Moneybagg Yo got a big streaming spike to 42. It looks like this is starting to get some virality, and I'm not really sure where it's coming from right now. Honestly, what might wind up the most stable are the gains for Blame It On You by Jason Aldean up to 71, and the boost off the debut for Single Saturday Night by Cole Swindell at 80. Country radio tends to withstand album bombs pretty effectively, so even if they do fall back, it likely will not be for long or for much. And thankfully, we got a pretty reasonable list of new arrivals here in comparison with what's likely coming next week, starting off with number 96, Minimum Wage by Blake Shelton.
Girl, looking at you, looking at me that way can make a man feel rich on minimum wage.
Okay, before everyone either gets excited or grabs a pitchfork, this is Blake Shelton. If you're expecting him to either make a song arguing for a higher livable wage or hop on the bandwagon of chains who are complaining about how people don't want to come back to shitty jobs when they could find better options or could have actual collective bargaining power, just relax. The title of the song implies a lot more going on than there actually is. Blake Shelton is one of the most profoundly cynical artists still working in Nashville today, and him actually taking a risk in the content, it's pretty much out of the question. If anything, this feels a lot closer to what Chris Stapleton already did much better with Millionaire a few years back. The whole I'm dirt broke, but being in love makes a man feel rich even though he's on minimum wage. And you know what? Once you kind of reset your expectations and realize the controversy is off the table, the song actually is kind of decent. Blake Shelton has got more charisma and presence than so many of his peers, and even if the hand clap feels pretty flimsy and you can tell that most of his groove section was lifted wholesale from Eric Church, especially off the booming kick drum and the wiry guitars, a lot of the sharper low-end pianos do a lot to underscore the melody that kicks into a more organic and neo-traditional tone where Blake Shelton has always sounded pretty damn comfortable, because again, with the success of a lot more acts picking up twang and more organic instrumentation, Blake Shelton is just going to go back to a lane where he's run plenty of times before. He's a veteran in the industry. And with that sort of comfort, it winds up okay. I'll take this. Number 82, What You Need by Don Toliver.
Take you out and put you in double C, little babe. Hey, you out of turning in them cheeks, little babe. Got you down and out and on your knees, little babe.
Okay, this might surprise some of you. Lemonade by Internet Money with the big hook from Don Toliver that was the best part of that song. Yeah, the track kind of grew on me a decent bit. And even if I think Don Toliver has made some questionable melodic instincts, he does take more risks than a lot of his peers, and that was the big reason I really wanted to give this a chance. And, okay, outside of the fact that the content is utterly empty and buying this girl brand names and drugs so that they can then have sex, I think where this song loses me is in the slower tempos and the weaker groove. The organs and the pianos behind the reasonably well-mixed trap percussion, they sound fine, but what made Lemonade actually work for me was how Don Toliver could play into the energy of the guitar melody, whereas this feels more lethargic and sleepy, and he's not exactly bringing a lot of energy or content to lift it back up. Hell, when he tries, he's almost peaking in the vocals, and they drop a filter on him to prevent that from happening. I don't know. For a lead-off single for an album, this feels really underweight, kind of underwhelming. I'm not hooked on this one. At least not yet. Next up, number 74, All I Know So Far by Pink.
Stay unfiltered and loud, you'll be proud of that skin full of scars. That's all I know so far. Wait.
Okay, look, I like Pink as a singer a lot. I really liked her as a pop star and a writer over a decade ago that's faded as she's gotten a fair bit older and made less interesting music. Which happens, sure, but it didn't give me expectations for this, especially considering the disaster of a song she made with Keith Urban. And thus, yeah, not a lot to say about this one. Greg Kurstin ramped up the choppy acoustics and the thicker low end to give this some swell, even if the vocal mixing sounds a little iffy. And as much as Pink can really sell the sort of self-esteem anthem sincerity in a song that's dedicated to her daughter trying for her advice to be herself and fully experience all of her emotions, even the negative ones, I feel like Pink could really write a song like this in her sleep and it would just not stick out. She's made worse versions of this song, but this isn't memorable or special. Next, number 56, Never Left by Lil Tecca.
She gon' let me hit, came back, now she undressed. Thought you got my real love, girl, that was another test. Said he want no vibes, came back like I never left.
Okay, he basically just sets me up with that song title to say, I wouldn't have noticed if you were here or gone, either way. But the truth is that Lil Tecca has had some real difficulty building any sort of staying power, and even if I wound up mostly liking Ransom long after it was cool, this was a kid I didn't expect to have much more in the way of success, and if he's thinking this is going to be what gets him back there, I'm not remotely convinced. The wispy tropical instrumental with the lumpy trap percussion, the very basic flow that highlights just how derivative he is, admitting on his first verse that he bought his swag, the fact that nothing else he mentions is remotely interesting or memorable. It's not even that this is bad so much as that it barely feels like it even exists. At least the pop trap that I actually like has some hooks to it. This is not worth thinking about. Let's just move on. Number 53, Higher Power by Coldplay.
Got me singing every second, dancing every hour. Oh yeah.
I was hearing some interesting buzz about this one, that it was going for more of an 80s inspired direction a few years late to being on the trend, and had Max Martin as a co-writer and a producer. And look, the Coldplay that I truly loved is long gone, and their last album was handily their worst, so going back on the pop pivot with a glossy tapping synths that by the time we get to the final hook can actually build a little bit of swell and clattering new wave drums. I mean, it's not a terrible idea, but until the very last hook, Chris Martin sounds utterly checked out, even more so than in the mid-2010s. When it comes to this sort of upbeat synth pop, you really want to embrace the scale, all that whirling energy, whereas this just sounds utterly lacking in commitment to really get there, down to the basic I'm in love and then dancing with you that I don't buy for a second that Chris Martin actually believes, which might be why they try to drop in so many different backing vocals to add some flavor to his hook and his chorus. You can tell that Max Martin's really trying to add that pop focus, that melodic punch, but that actually works when he's got an act who's going to actually commit to the moment, and Coldplay just do not sound like they're there on this one. I mean, it's fine, but I remember an era when this band was better than fine, and I don't think we're going back to it. Number 11, Miss the Rage by Trippie Redd and Playboi Carti.
Yeah, they like Stevie, they can't see me, they won't beat me.
What is it with this week and giving me easy song titles to make a lot of quippy remarks? I mean, I don't miss the rage, it's bad for my blood pressure. Anyway, this is the sort of collaboration that makes entirely too much sense as a lead-off single to a new Trippie Redd album, because apparently that one for which I specifically made a solo review, he's just gonna ignore, just keep plowing on ahead. I'm not bitter, and yet this is the single that nearly made the top 10 by cribbing from the Whole Lotta Red formula with a grainy sample and a lot of badly mixed bass, and that's before they tack on some chipmunk vocals in the background? And from there, look, there's just not that much to this, especially when you have a song that feels this leaden and heavy that doesn't flatter either artist on it. I mean, I thought there might have been some potential with Trippie Redd going for more of a trap rock sound, and you know, I'll say this for Playboi Carti, if you give him something with gloss and bounce, it's got potential, but for an instrumental like this, it drags everyone down. Especially Playboi Carti describes eating out a woman with the sort of graphic detail that makes none of it attractive. And look, I get that this is supposed to sound buzzy and raw and DIY, and if it slaps, nobody cares about everything else it does wrong. It's clearly pulling from that SoundCloud rap approach despite both acts being long past it. But there is a difference between a lot of raw heaviness and a lack of dynamics or competent mixing to actually go hard. So yeah, not on board with this one. Should be better. And finally, number 8, Interlude by J.
This
Cole.
shit deep, undercovers creep. This southern heat make them bearable. Summer just last week, seen your mama weep. Crying cause she don't want to bury your brother. The blood leaks while the EMTs gotta carry her baby like surrogate mothers.
You know, I spent a lot of time reviewing J. Cole's The Off Season on my main channel. If you haven't seen it, check out the review, as YouTube apparently recommended it less than 15% of the time. But I didn't actually talk much about this song, because as much as it's a flex to have your single be an interlude from the album, it also comes with the fact that there's just not that much to say about it. It's a single verse bracketed by some samples from producer Tommy Parker before the sandy trap percussion slides in courtesy of T-, and J. Cole goes off about the violence that he sees in the streets, where his grind got him out of it, but he still sees a lot of the danger and the impact. And while you can tell he's kind of annoyed with the stream trolling by dropping a pot shot at the double disc releases, I'm kind of there with them. But the most interesting concept here is referring to Jesus Christ teaching about turning the other cheek. And now that doesn't really seem like adequate advice to J. Cole speaking to the streets, especially if he wonders if any of Jesus's crew was winding up getting killed in that era. And you know, I can actually firmly answer that question, yes, as John the Baptist was executed on a whim by King Herod's wife. And if you read any sort of biblical apocrypha or understood the history of the Roman occupation of Judea, there were plenty of people who wanted Jesus to strike back against Roman oppression, become the king of the Jews, including Judas Iscariot. And not only did Jesus not want any of that, he wound up getting brought before Pontius Pilate on that charge that he would reject again, and he would wind up getting killed anyway. So when J. Cole thinks he's making a profound statement by highlighting Jesus, Nipsey Hussle, and Pimp C, they were all killed at 33, great men taken before their time, it's just kind of exasperating that he sees the tragedy but goes no further to talk about it, because it's an interlude. It just feels like the punch was pulled there. He came up with a good idea, didn't follow through. And yet the funny thing is that outside of that frustration, this is still probably the best song here. It's getting Best of the Week, but just there was capacity there for more. Worst of the Week is Miss the Rage by Trippie Redd and Playboi Carti. Sorry folks, no groove, bad mixing, underweight presentation. It's a dud for me. It happens. Next week it's probably all gonna be J. Cole, and it's likely to debut high enough that my album bomb rules will be insufficient and I'll wind up covering all of it again. Stay tuned for that. But until then, I'm Mark. You're watching Billboard Breakdown, affiliated with Spectrum Pulse.